listener production.
Hey, it's Helen Smith here with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Did you know what we wear, how we look, and even our hairstyles might be able to help predict a recession?
I think that is really an indicator of this sort of economic slump that we're hearing so much about. People dressing less in flashy pieces with big logos and that kind of thing, and more gravitating towards those pieces that are more affordable.
So if that's the case, what does it mean for Aussies in the era of the mullet comeback and the return of jorts? That's coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with the listener news team. It's Monday, the 21st of April.
Thanks, guys. Well, taking a look at news, a reminder to stay safe around the border this long weekend with a few accidents. Now, a father has died and his teenage son rushed to hospital after being swept off rocks while fishing in Sydney South. After a search, the pair were found face down in the water yesterday morning. It's the sixth drowning this Easter. Meantime, 3 people have been taken to hospital after a powerboat and jet ski collided north of Brisbane. Crews were called to the incident in Moreton Bay around 2 p.m. yesterday, with one man's injuries described as potentially life-threatening. To other news, another promising news poll for Labor ahead of the federal election. It continues to hold the lead over the coalition, 52 to 48% two-party preferred. Now, PM Anthony Albanese could be staring at another term. He's widened his lead over opposition leader Peter Dutton, 52 to 36. Now, looking at Easter festivities, overnight the world has celebrated Easter Sunday with the Pope blessing a crowd at the Vatican. The 88-year-old pontiff appeared frail as he was wheeled onto the balcony in a wheelchair.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, buona Pasqua.
Dear brothers and sisters, happy Easter.
That translation thanks to Sky. His appearance was highly anticipated after being discharged from hospital last month with an infection that led to double pneumonia. Now, taking a look at sport, Aussie Oscar Piastri is the first Australian to lead the Formula One Drivers' Championship in more than a decade, making the most of an early penalty to pole sitter Max Verstappen to claim victory in Saudi Arabia this morning.
Once I got on the inside, I wasn't coming out of turn 1 in second. So, obviously the stewards had to get involved, but thought I was plenty far enough up, and in the end, that's what got me the race.
On Fox Sports there, and in AFL, officers are investigating after a heated exchange between a fan and AFL player during yesterday's Swan v Port clash at the SCG. The Swan supporter threw an object at power star Alir. The crowd member was removed from the venue and interviewed by police.
Thanks to the listener newsroom for those headlines there. Coming up next is our deep dive on whether skinny jeans and jorts might be able to help predict a recession. Hey, it's Helen Smith here with you. Can skinny jeans, hemlines, skincare, and even hairstyles help predict a recession? The global economy has been rattled over the last couple of weeks, with economists suggesting we could enter a recession by the end of 2025. Economic shifts have famously been linked to how we dress, with the hemline index and high heel theory both suggesting that hemlines get shorter and heels get higher in economic booms, and vice versa in downturns. And you might have heard of the lipstick effect, which is when sales of affordable luxury items rise in an economic downturn. The Australian Bureau of Statistics found that spending on clothing, footwear and accessories declined by 2.5% in April last year, and it's struggling to make up any ground in 2025. So, is there any validity to recession trends? And could there be a hidden reason behind the return of jorts? Amy Campbell is the features editor of Esquire Australia. Amy, how are global economies changing the way we dress?
That is a really big question, and I think there are so many different facets to it. But I would say one of the biggest things we've seen in the last 2 years, but increasingly I'd say the first half of this year, is this shift towards people dressing in sort of a more conservative, subtle way. And I say that, we had this big thing called quiet luxury that kind of emerged in 2023 that really is sort of a buzzword for styles of clothing that are, more demure, monochrome colours, less shouty in terms of logos. And I think we're seeing brands that are sort of not quite fast fashion, but are sort of that accessible price point. Brands such as Uniqlo and COS really benefit from that sort of pared back, more kind of subtle way of dressing because the products that they offer are really in line with that. So I think that is really an indicator of this sort of economic slump that we're hearing so much about. People dressing less in flashy pieces with big logos and that kind of thing, and more gravitating towards those pieces that are more affordable but are also kind of a little bit less in your face and wearing your money on your sleeve.
What do we know about our spending habits? Have we seen anything change over the last year or so?
Definitely. I've seen a lot of reports on 2024 in particular being one of the worst years for luxury spending since the GFC in 2008. I saw that LVMH, which is the parent company that owns Louis Vuitton, Dior, Fendi, Tiffany & Co. and a bunch of other luxury brands, recorded a big slowdown in revenue last year. I think they went from 14% growth in 2023 to 3% in the first quarter of this financial year and then 1% in the second. So that is a really clear downturn. And I think that just shows that the way that we are spending, or, the way we're not spending, is definitely filtering through to the results of these big luxury brands. So you can really see that in the numbers that people definitely are spending less on those big ticket items for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned there, this signs of an economic slump. I want to know if there's any truth behind the hemline or lipstick effect index.
I think this is really interesting because I think we can really and I think the internet loves to sort of play into these little micro details and really find meaning in the way that we dress. I mean, I do think there's something to the hemline index. I was thinking about this brand, which is a luxury brand, Italian brand, Miu Miu, which is Prada's sort of younger sister brand. In 2022, it really brought back the return of the miniskirt. Everything was short. They had miniskirts on the runway. Everyone, that was filtering down into your high street brands. Everyone was wearing them. On Miu Miu's most recent autumn-winter runway, skirts were all below the knee. And we could say that it could be something to do with the hemline index. I think also another important thing to remember is that fashion is cyclical. Trends come and go. What goes up must go down.
So looking at streetwear that we have in Australia right now, jorts have been really popular over the last year or so, I guess, for both female and males. Is this part of the hemline index?
I think it's probably similar to what I was saying before about the mini skirt thing. If you look back at the sort of mini short trend that was really big, I don't know, in the mid 2010s, it was high waist and mini shorts, but jorts are very low waisted. So I think personally, I'm going to say that jorts, I think, are more of a return to sort of that early 2000s trend of low waist, baggier styles, and probably a reaction to that micro mini short that we had a few years ago rather than a part of the hemline index.
All right, can you talk me through a little bit more of the lipstick effect where people essentially aren't buying the big ticket items, they're buying smaller luxury items. Are we seeing that play out?
So most sort of luxury or higher end brands have what we call entry-level items, and they usually consist of pieces like, small leather goods, beauty items, fragrances. And I think definitely in a time of recession or potential, looming recession, people fashion is a form of escapism. And so buying a sort of smaller ticket item like a lipstick or a makeup palette or a wallet or a coin purse, I do feel like that still gives you the opportunity to feel like you're participating and you're involved in the conversation without really having to splash out on the most expensive handbag. So I do for sure think there's validity in that.
Yeah, and it's also been linked with people's self-esteem and their confidence, how these little small purchases do boost morale when the economy is looking quite dire. But I want to talk more about recession trends in big brands and in the business sense of manufacturing. How are we seeing that play out? Are there cost-cutting measures or people using different colours or less material?
The less material one's interesting because I think that's something that we really saw during the sort of 1920s going into 1930s. That was literally quite a practical move that brands had to make because fabric was so expensive that they had to pull back on the amount that was used. But I have seen the idea floated that a skinny jean's coming back because it is a recession indicator, less material. I would say that's more to do with the cyclical nature of trends again. One thing that I do think we're seeing, which I think is a really interesting part of this conversation, is the rise of dupes. And a dupe is like a knockoff of a luxury item. It's a cheaper alternative that closely resembles the more expensive counterpart. And in the last year or so, dupe culture has become huge, and in fashion and beauty as well. And there's no shame in wearing a knockoff anymore, which I think is really telling of sort of the way that consumer thought has shifted, that we're sort of all happy to go for the less expensive item. And I think brands that are making those dupes, such as Uniqlo and COS, are really, again, benefiting because, yes, we want to wear the viral La Mer croissant bag, but it's really expensive. So we're going for the Uniqlo bag instead, basically.
And what about trend predictions? Now, how far in advance does a clothing company, for example, forecast what it will be making or what we will be wearing? How much of an impact does the economy have on these trend forecasts?
Brands plan their collections and forecast a very long time in ahead. Most are sort of working at the very least a year in advance on their collections. So it's interesting to me because when you're working that far out, you can often not really predict what is coming and what is going to resonate. But of course, these designers know that's why they're in those positions. And what we've been seeing quite a bit on the runway recently is brands digging into their archives and finding prints and silhouettes from a more economically prosperous time and bringing those back on the runway because they kind of evoke a sense of familiarity and nostalgia that I think is really powerful at the moment. And we have seen that on the runway quite a bit lately. And I do wonder how much of that is thinking about the lack of consumer sort of confidence when it comes to spending a lot of money on something that you don't actually know is going to be, a popular piece or that you're going to be on trend. But by bringing back an older print or, a style that was really popular, you are kind of tapping into our desire for nostalgia while also kind of bringing something that, there's that sort of track record of it being a popular item.
And overall, how seriously should we be taking these trends or indicators to predict a recession?
I do wonder how much those are more buzzwords than they are actual indicators of the economy and the direction that it's heading. So I think that while certainly the rise of more sort of conservative fashion and moving away from logos and very overt displays of wealth is certainly a sign that people are pulling back their spending and, also the image that they're projecting. I do think that we can get a little bit too tied up in wanting to pin a label to everything. And I think we really love pinning this recession core label to things like longer hemlines and the return of sort of this business casual style as well. So I think tread carefully, but I think there probably is some truth to it, yes.
Amy, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
That was Amy Campbell, features editor of Esquire Australia, speaking with me there. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. Before you go, though, we'd love it if you could share this ep with someone else you think might enjoy it as well. And if you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on YouTube and TikTok. Just search Listener Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed with another special Rewind episode with Julia Gillard at 4 p.m. I'm Helen Smith. See you next time.